Welcome to Congress in Context. If you're listening to this, you're probably tired of the cable news shouting matches and, those 30-second sound bites that don't really tell you anything. You want to know what's actually happening in the engine room of American democracy?
And that's exactly it. That's why we're here. We bypass the spin room
Eh.
and go straight to the source code, the congressional record. It's the unedited, unglamorous, and often pretty overwhelming transcript of everything said on the floor of the House.
And today, we are zooming in on a single very busy day, Wednesday, January 21, 2026. To the casual observer, this might look like just another Wednesday in D.C., but when you actually read the text, and we've read the whole stack, you see these massive fault lines in American society cracking open right there on the floor.
It was a heavy day. I mean, we're talking about a fierce battle over the definition of health care for pregnant women, a high-stakes trade-off between green energy and conservation in Minnesota, and, the hidden machinery of how money moves through politics.
But what I love about the record is that sandwiched between these huge ideological wars, you find these incredibly human moments. You find tributes to pool players, basketball memoirists, and struggling farmers. It's a cross-section of the entire country.
So let's get into it. We've got the documents right here. The House was operating under House Resolution 1009, which basically set the rules for the day. And the headline fight, right out of the gate, was about the intersection of poverty, pregnancy, and public funding.
This was H.R. 6945. The official title is the Supporting Pregnant and Parenting Women and Families Act. Now, whenever you see a title that broad, you have to ask, what does the text actually do? Because nobody's going to run on a platform of not supporting families.
Right. The devil's always in the funding mechanism. And the mechanism here involves TNF. That's Temporary Assistance for Needy Families.
Okay, let's pause there. We should probably define terms, because TNF gets thrown around a lot in D.C., but it affects real people very differently. This is what most people think of when they hear welfare, right?
Historically, yes. It's the block grant program from the 90s that replaced the old welfare system. The federal government gives a chunk of money to the states, and the states have some, discretion on how to spend it to help low-income families. This bill, from Representative Michelle Fischbach of Minnesota, was designed to codify, to make it permanent law, that states can use these specific welfare funds to support pregnancy resource centers.
And this is where the friction starts. Because Pregnancy Resource Center means something very, very specific in this context. These aren't hospitals.
Exactly. These are typically nonprofit organizations, often religiously affiliated, that aim to discourage abortion. They provide things like diapers, parenting classes, sometimes ultrasounds, but, and this is key, they're usually not licensed medical clinics.
So the debate on the floor wasn't really about helping moms. It was about legitimacy and where taxpayer dollars should flow.
Precisely. It was a battle over definitions. On the proponent side, you had Representative Jason Smith from Missouri and Representative Yakim from Indiana. Their argument was purely about material support. Rep. Smith was incredibly fired up. He actually called the Biden administration's attempt to restrict this funding hogwash.
Hogwash. You don't hear that every day on the House floor. It's got a real old-school ring to it.
It does. But look at Representative Yakim's argument. He got very personal. He told a story about how he and his wife 17 years ago were young, scared, and used a pregnancy resource center. To him, these places are a lifeline. He listed the services, car seats, formula, counseling. The argument is, if TNF is for needy families and these centers help needy families, why block the funds?
That's the pro-family argument. But the opposition, led by Representative Judy Chu from California and Representative Gwen Moore from Wisconsin, they weren't arguing against the diapers. They were arguing against the institution.
Right. Representative Chu called them fake clinics. This is where the technical detail really matters. She argued that because these centers aren't medical facilities, they aren't bound by HIPAA.
HIPAA being the federal law that protects your medical privacy. So if I go to my GP, my records are locked down.
Correct. So if you go to a doctor, your data is protected. If you go to one of these centers, legally, that data might not be protected in the same way. Rep. Chu cited studies claiming some of them use deceptive practices, making women think they're in a real medical clinic when they aren't, or providing misinformation.
So the Democratic argument was essentially taxpayer money meant for the poorest families shouldn't go to unregulated ideological organizations.
That's the core of it. Right.
Yeah.
Gwenmore was very specific. She argued that TNF funds are already scarce. The block grant hasn't been increased in years to keep up with inflation. She said diverting that money to organizations that don't provide comprehensive medical care is a misuse of the funds.
It's a classic case of two sides looking at the same building and seeing two completely different things. One sees a community support hub, the other sees a deceptive trap. How did the vote go?
It was tight. 215 yeas to 209 nays. It passed, but almost entirely along party lines. It just shows how polarized the issue of reproductive health support remains, even when you're talking about diapers and formula.
Okay, so that passed the House, but we stayed in Minnesota for the next big fight, and this one involves a fascinating trade-off: environment, economy, future of energy.
This was H.J. Ray's 140. It's a Congressional Review Act resolution, a CRA.
Let's unpack the CRA for a second. This is a tool Congress uses to essentially veto rules made by the executive branch, isn't it?
Yes, it lets Congress overturn a federal agency rule with a simple majority vote. In this case, they were targeting the Biden administration's Public Land Order number 7917.
And what did that order do?
It withdrew about 225,000 acres of federal land in the Superior National Forest in Minnesota from mineral leasing for 20 years. Basically, the Biden administration said, no mining here. Representative Pete Stauber, also from Minnesota, introduced this resolution to say, yes, mining here.
This is the area known as the Duluth complex. And this is where the story gets complicated. We're not just talking about digging rocks. This area holds one of the world's largest undeveloped deposits of copper and nickel.
Critical minerals.
Wow.
And that is the absolute pivot point. We need these for everything. Electric vehicles, wind turbines, defense systems. Representative Stauber and Representative Westerman from Arkansas leaned heavily into the national security angle. They argued, why are we buying these things from adversaries or countries using child labor when we have it right here under our feet?
It's the energy independence argument. We want a green transition, we want EVs, but we need the metal to build them.
Exactly. And Stauber also leaned into the economics. He threw out a striking statistic. He said the average miner makes $115,000 a year, while a seasonal tourism job in the area pays about $35,000. He's arguing for the livelihood of his district. He was very clear that lifting the ban doesn't automatically
Approve a mine.
Right. It just allows the application process to move forward.
But the opposition sees the Duluth complex differently. They see it as the watershed for the Boundary Waters.
The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness.
No.
It's a pristine, water-rich environment, one of the most visited wilderness areas in the country. Representative Betty McCollum, another Minnesotan, so you have Minnesotan versus Minnesotan here,
Right.
and Representative Huffman from California argued that this isn't like mining for iron, which Minnesota is famous for. This is sulfide ore mining.
What's the difference? Why does the ore type matter so much?
It's chemistry. Sulfide ore, when you expose it to air and water, creates sulfuric acid. It's called acid mine drainage. The opposition's argument is that in a water-rich place like the Boundary Waters, you just can't contain that pollution. Representative McCollum's point was that the risk of permanently poisoning a massive freshwater ecosystem outweighs the value of the minerals. She said some places are just too precious to mine.
This feels like one of the central dilemmas of the next decade. We need these minerals for the green transition to build the EVs and the batteries, but getting them might destroy the very environments we're trying to save. It's green versus green.
That is the tension perfectly encapsulated in this vote. Do you sacrifice the local wilderness for the global supply chain? The House voted yes. The resolution passed 214 to 208, overturning the mining ban.
Now, before we move away from the legislative machinery, I want to talk about a specific moment that happened right before that pregnancy center vote. It involved something called a motion to recommit.
Yeah, the MTR. This is, it's inside baseball, but it's crucial for understanding how the House actually works.
To a casual listener, it would sound like Representative Gwen Moore just stood up and proposed a nice idea, adding language to protect child care centers from harassment, and then the majority just voted it down. Why would anyone vote against protecting child care centers?
It looks bad on paper, doesn't it? But it's a trap, a procedural trap. The motion to recommit is the minority party's last chance to amend a bill before the final vote. If the motion passes, the bill is usually sent back to committee.
Which effectively kills it, or at least delays it indefinitely.
Exactly. So the minority party, in this case, the Democrats, always picks a topic that is politically painful to vote against. They'll pick something like safety for child care centers or veterans benefits. They force the majority to vote no on that good thing in order to save their bill.
So when you see a campaign ad saying Representative so-and-so voted against safety for child care centers, they're usually talking about a motion to recommit vote.
99% of the time, yes. It's a game. The majority votes it down not because they hate child care centers, but because they have to keep the bill moving. The vote was 209 to 213. It failed, as these motions almost always do. But it's a fascinating look at how party discipline just overrides the actual content of the motion.
The theater of parliament. Now let's pivot. We've talked about the high-level fights, but the congressional record also contains the extensions of remarks. These are written statements that aren't spoken on the floor but get added to the official record.
I honestly think this is the most underrated section. It's where members stop posturing for the cameras and actually recognize people back home.
And on this day, January 21st, we found some really poignant connections. While the floor was debating the future of mining in Minnesota, we found a tribute that looked at the past of mining. While not spoken on the floor, Representative Jack Bergman of Michigan submitted a statement recognizing a man named Thomas L. Pelissero.
Yes. Pelissero wrote a memoir called Bring One Home, and it's about growing up in Bessemer, Michigan in the 1960s.
And what stood out was the context. He describes the decline of the iron and copper mines in that region 50 years ago.
It's a ghostly echo of the debate that was happening on the floor. You have Stauber fighting to bring mining jobs back, and Bergman honoring a memoir about when those jobs left. It shows the generational trauma of these boom and bust cycles. It's not just policy, it's memory.
And then we had a tribute to a different kind of local hero. While not spoken on the floor, Representative Steny Hoyer from Maryland submitted a statement honoring James Mack Alsobrooks.
This one made me smile. Alsobrooks was a legendary pool player and a hand dancer.
Hand dancing, that's a specific D.C. and Maryland swing dance style, right?
It is.
Yeah.
But Hoyer wasn't just talking about his dance moves. He talked about Alsobrooks as a mentor, a guy who used the pool hall to teach young men geometry and life skills. It's a reminder that civic leadership isn't just being a judge or a mayor. Sometimes it's the guy at the community center who keeps kids out of trouble.
Speaking of judges, we did have a classic tribute to public service. While not spoken on the floor, Representative Nicholas Langworthy of New York submitted a statement for the Honorable M. William Bowler.
40 years of service. From town justice to state Supreme Court. These are the gears of the system. We focus on the Supreme Court in D.C., but guys like Bowler are the ones handling day-to-day justice for decades.
I want to draw one more contrast from the record that I found really telling. It's about agriculture. We had two different mentions of the farming crisis, but the tone was completely different.
This was a great example of that floor versus paper dynamic. On the floor, you had Representative Don Davis from North Carolina giving a 1-minute speech, and he was sounding the alarm.
He called it a perfect storm.
He did. Drought, high input costs, trade uncertainty. He predicted a $1.9 billion hit to North Carolina's ag economy. He was urgent. He was basically saying, my people are drowning.
But then look at the written extensions of remarks. While not spoken on the floor, Representative Mike Carey from Ohio submitted a statement honoring two local leaders, Jed Bauer and Scott Metzger.
Right. But these aren't just local farmers. Bauer is the president of the National Corn Growers Association, and Metzger is president of the American Soybean Association.
The big leagues.
Exactly. So you have Davis screaming about the crisis on the ground and Kerry tipping his hat to the lobbyists and association leaders who are in D.C. trying to fix it from the top down. It shows the full ecosystem. You need the panic on the floor to get attention, but you need the organizational power of the Corn Growers and Soybean Association to actually write the farm bill.
So we've seen the bills, the procedural tricks, and the local heroes, but we need to zoom out. Why are these fights mining pregnancy centers so bitter? Why is the gridlock so intense?
Well, the answer might lie in what happened at the very end of the day. After the voting was done, there was a special order hour. This is time set aside for members to speak on a specific topic.
And this one was led by Representative Suhas Subramanyam from Virginia. The topic was the 16th anniversary of Citizens United.
Citizens United. The 2010 Supreme Court ruling that, opened the floodgates for unlimited corporate spending in elections.
The tone here shifted completely. Earlier, we heard about hogwash and specific policy fights. But in this session, members like Joe Neguse from Colorado and Teresa Lugger Fernandez from New Mexico were talking about the system itself.
They were arguing that the reason we have these intense, gridlocked battles is because of the money. Representative Neguse called it a dark money system. The argument is that when corporations can spend unlimited amounts to influence elections, the legislative agenda gets warped.
And there was a specific connection made by Representative Grijalva from Arizona that tied it all the way back to that mining vote we discussed earlier.
Yes, he explicitly linked corporate spending to environmental inaction. He argued that fossil fuel and mining companies pour money into the political system to ensure that bills like the mining withdrawal overturn get passed.
So, if you're a listener trying to understand why the House voted to overturn that mining ban in Minnesota, Representative Grijalva is saying, don't just look at the jobs argument, look at the donor list.
It provides the meta-context. The special order was essentially saying, we spent all day fighting over these specific bills, but the outcome may have been decided months ago by who funded the campaigns.
It's a cynical take, maybe, but it's a structural one. It forces you to look at the whole board, not just the pieces.
It is. And whether you agree with the Citizens United ruling or not, many argue it's a free speech issue, you can't deny that it has fundamentally changed the incentives in Congress. The special order serves as a reminder that every vote we discuss today, TANF, mining, even the procedural motions, is happening inside that financial framework.
So to wrap this up, we started with the question, what are they doing in there all day?
And the answer is complex. On January 21st, 2026, they redefined welfare eligibility to include pro-life centers. They prioritized mineral extraction over wilderness protection in Minnesota. They played procedural games with childcare safety. And then, as the lights were dimming, they debated whether the whole system is broken by money.
And in the background, they took the time to write letters home about pool players and soybean farmers.
It's a mess, but it's our mess. And reading the record forces you to see the nuance. You see that the mining versus environment debate isn't just villains and heroes. It's union jobs versus clean water. You see that the pregnancy center debate is about the fundamental role of government aid.
It's not sound bites, it's trade-offs.
Exactly. And if you want to verify any of this, if you want to read Rep. Davis's full speech on the farm crisis, or look at the roll call vote for the mining resolution, you can go to congress.gov. Look up the congressional record for January 21st, 2026. It's all there.
Public and transparent. That's the deep dive for today. Thanks for peeling back the layers with us.
Stay informed.
See you next time.